Beautiful. I'd invite you to turn with me to page 245 as we prepare to take the Torah from the Ark. Assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the strangers in your cities, to hear, to learn, to revere Adonai your God, to observe faithfully the words of this Torah. And let their children who do not yet know it hear, that they too may learn to revere Adonai, your God. And so we'll take out the Torah, if you'll turn with us to page 246, and then we'll go to 248. And I invite you to rise if you're able.
Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, Udevar Adonai mirushalayim, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, le'amo Yisrael bekedushato, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shmo, Gadlu Adonai iti, Unerome Shemo Yachtav.
Invite you to be seated. Give a little introduction to the Torah portion, and then invite you to join me in the blessing. So we're at Parshat Balak in the book of Numbers, and in our Reform Torah commentary, the editor, Rabbi Gunther Plaut, writes about this week's Torah portion. He says, "It is one of those intriguing passages of the Torah that appear simple and straightforward on the surface, yet are complex when studied in detail." And I so agree. There are so many questions that arise from this tale, but I will leave the more in-depth look at most of them till tomorrow's Torah study, and I invite you to join me at 9 a.m. for that on Zoom. But in brief, in our Torah portion, the Moabite king Balak hires Balaam to curse the Israelites. We get 4 separate prophecies from this foreign prophet Balaam. In each one, Balaam blesses Israel instead of cursing them. The most famous is, as you've already heard, his blessing, Ma tovu ohalecha Yisrael mishkenotecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents and your dwelling places, Israel. These words of blessing and praise are so evocative and positive that they became part of our morning liturgy already in the 8th century. I thought I would share with you tonight, though, one of the less well-known prophecies that Balaam offers in our Torah portion. Here, Israel is praised as, quote, a people who dwells apart from everyone else. So we first have to consider, what does it mean to say Israel dwells apart? How is this a blessing? One commentator tells us that livadad, to be separate, has the connotation here that Israel is protected by God. I couldn't help think about the COVID bubbles. So Israel had its own bubble from God, a special relationship with God that kept Israel safe. And that would certainly be a blessing and would explain why King Balak is so angry at this pronouncement that Israel dwells apart. So that's one possibility. A second is that it might mean that Israel seeks to live by high ethical standards. This seems to fit with Balaam's words in this portion where he says about himself, "May I die the death of the upright. May my fate be like theirs, meaning like Israel. So Israel here is connected with the upright. Or perhaps Balaam is simply looking out. He's above the people, and he looks down, and he sees that they are this large, strong people dwelling apart, and he says that in itself is a blessing. It's going to keep them from being assimilated or taken over by another people. So we have here really three different ways of understanding what it means to say that we, Israel, are a people who dwells apart. So which is the correct answer? When Balaam says these words, we dwell apart, is it about God's protection? Is it about our ethics? Or is it about the size and strength of Klal Yisrael? I think that as Balaam looks down on the people, the answer is perhaps yes to all three. The blessing of Israel is in having a close relationship with God, in trying to live to a high ethical standard, and in their large, solidified presence. So as I think about this, I hope for all of these blessings for us, for our community today, that Israel may have a close relationship with God, that we may strive to keep the prophet's ethical lessons, and that we may remain a strong people. Wait, Rabbi, you might say, do you really want us to separate ourselves off from everyone else? Well, no, I don't. We are, in fact, blessed today that we actually don't dwell apart. Jews are citizens of many countries, but we fit in so well that we are perhaps in danger of assimilating out of existence. The latest Pew study on the Jewish community, just recently released, continues to show a slide among liberal Jews away from Jewish religious practice. It is worrisome. It is not good for our people. It is not good for us individually. And I don't think it is good for our world. So my hope is that we continue to work hard to be both full citizens of every country we live in, but also to remain a strong, distinct people. My hope on this Shabbat is that we proudly hold on to our faith and that we encourage our children and our grandchildren to do the same. That while we are part of the larger world, we continue to keep to our unique identity, our calendar, and our faith. Many peoples have their own religion, their own culture, their own identity, and I think this is beautiful. It's one of the things that makes our world so special. We Jews just need to make sure that we too are keeping strong to our distinct identity. That is my hope for us today. May this foreign prophet Balaam bless us. May he say to us, you are a strong, distinct people. That is my hope. So I'm going to be reading from Numbers chapter 23, verses 6 through 12, for any who want to follow along, or maybe you have it on your phone, as some people do. But first, I hope you'll join me because these words were said to all of us, so let us join together. The blessing is on page 250. 250. And I'm going to invite everybody to say the beginning. I'll do the middle line, and then you'll repeat that and continue on. I hope that makes sense. So together we start. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach. Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Vayashov elav v'hine nitzav al olato. Hu v'chol sarei Moav, vayisa mishalo, vayomar, min Aram yancheni, Balak melech Moav, mehararei kedem. Lecha, ara li Yaakov, ulecha, zoama Yisrael. Ma ekov lo kabo el, uma ezom lo za'am Adonai. Ki merosh tsurim erenu, umigvaot ashurenu. Hein am levadad yishkom. Uvegoyim lo yidchashav. Mi mana afar Yaakov, umispar et rova Yisrael. Tamot nafshi mot yisharim, utehi achariti kamohu. Vayomer Balak el Bilam, ma asita li? Lekov oivai lekachticha, v'hine verachta varech. Vayaan vayomar, halo et asher yasim Adonai bafi, oto eshmor ledaber. And for those for whom it's helpful, which is, I think, all of us, the English. So Bilam returned to Balak and found him standing beside his offerings, and all the Moabite dignitaries were with him. And Bilam took up his theme, and he said, "From Aram has Balak brought me, Moab's king from the hills of the east. Come, curse me, Jacob. Come, tell Israel's doom. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How doom when the Eternal has not doomed? As I see them from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights, there is a people that dwells apart, not reckoned among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, number the dust cloud of Israel? May I die the death of the upright. May my fate be like theirs." Then Balak said to Balaam, "What have you done to me? Here I brought you to curse my enemies, and instead you have blessed them." And Balaam replied, "I can only repeat faithfully what the Eternal puts in my mouth." So on page 250, if you'll join me please in the blessing after Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. We'll turn to